Hello again, everybody. I'm Evelyn McColgan with Workers' Hammer. I'm back with another video about why we should defend Lucy Letby. I want to thank all of you for your positive messages about the previous video that we posted, which was titled Unions Must Defend Lucy Letby. And to those of you who said in the comments, if there's a protest, you'll be there, you will all be pleased to know that we are going to call a protest under the title Free Lucy Letby, where and when it will be outside the Thirlwall inquiry, which opens on the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day in Liverpool. I will have much more on this at the end of the video, but we do need a show of strength, so I'm appealing to all of you to come to and build for this protest. Now, first of all, I'm going to go through, including for new people who didn't see the previous video, I'm going to go through our Workers' Hammer article, why we defend Lucy Letby. For anyone who is trying to understand the Letby case, the sheer volume of information, including complex medical arguments, can seem daunting. But actually, it's quite straightforward. Lucy Letby was scapegoated for the failings of care in the hospital where she worked. She was framed up in a show trial that turned a dedicated and professional nurse into a monster who we were led to believe was a killer of tiny, vulnerable infants. The NHS bosses, whose entire system depends on taking advantage of the selflessness and dedication of particularly women workers, but also men, they had no qualms about pinning the blame for the system's failings on this young working class woman. When I talk about the selflessness and dedication that the NHS takes advantage of, I remember something that Adam Kay said in This Is Going to Hurt, which is that the entire NHS would collapse if doctors and nurses simply went home at the end of their shift. So, what I want to emphasize in particular is why we think the trade unions must take up Lucy Letby's case. And to explain that, we must unpack the whole toxic mix of factors that led to her frame-up by the NHS bosses, the police, and the courts. First of all, Lucy worked in conditions that are all too typical of the collapsing NHS, where patients are dying in corridors and staff are leaving in droves because they simply cannot do it anymore. The neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital, where Lucy worked, treated very premature babies who, by definition, are very high risk. The number of baby deaths rose there in 2015 to 2016. The unit itself was in an appalling state. It was short of such vital equipment as incubators. It was woefully understaffed, not to mention that, on occasion, sewage backed up into sinks and toilets. But the hospital authorities were not interested in tackling these problems. Rather than recruiting more nurses and doctors or investing in more equipment, they looked for someone to blame. Some consultants branded Lucy Letby the angel of death, started a whispering campaign on the grounds that she was on duty when many of the deaths occurred. Of course, she was on duty a lot. It was a very understaffed unit. The conviction of Lucy Letby is a warning to every worker, especially, but not only in the National Health Service, that what happened to her can happen to anyone. Following a police investigation, aided by consultants at the unit where she worked, Letby was put on trial on multiple murder charges. But to make this frame-up stick and to secure a conviction, the prosecution had one big problem. There was no evidence that Letby or anyone had deliberately harmed any child. And so to prove that she was guilty of murder, the crucial question was, how exactly did these babies die? The answer to that was provided to the courts by the leading expert witness for the prosecution, a man by the name of Dowie Evans, a pediatric consulting expert. To convince the courts that babies were being murdered completely unnoticed by the doctors and nurses at the time, by the way, Evans came up with a series of hypotheses that were pivotal to convicting her. He claimed that air was injected into babies' stomachs via nasogastric tubes, causing air embolism. He had another hypothesis about insulin poisoning. These theories of his have since been discredited, widely discredited, and there is now an avalanche of material available that exposes the trial as completely rigged. The Crown Prosecution Service itself admitted that door swipe data submitted to the trial as supposed evidence that Letby was alone during some baby collapses, it was incorrect. The evidence was incorrect. Post-it notes were submitted to the trial, supposedly as evidence, saying things like, "I am evil," written by Lucy, were presented in court as if they were her confessions of guilt. In fact, she wrote them on the advice of her therapists to help her cope with the distress that she was going through at the time. The blood tests that show sky-high insulin levels in some babies have been shown to be invalid. Now, as I mentioned, the testimony that was provided by Dowie Evans was vital to her conviction. But he was not an independent expert witness. He, in fact, had helped the police to build a case against Lucy Letby. By now, his theory about air embolism as the cause of death has been ridiculed by medical experts using terms like implausible, not practically feasible, and many more descriptions along those lines. Last week, Lucy's defense barrister, Mark MacDonald, held a second press conference which featured Dr. Shu Lee, whose research was misused at Lucy's trial. Dr. Shu Lee just shredded the evidence that has been used to convict Letby. His contribution was absolutely devastating. Catch it on YouTube if you missed it, because it's powerful and compelling. Now, one of the impacts of the press conference was that it has really helped to turn the tide among the media on the Letby case. Papers which once fueled and aided the cruel witch hunt against Lucy Letby now started to suggest that maybe she's not guilty. For example, the Metro headlined, quote, "There were no murders," unquote, and even The Guardian is beginning to get off its witch hunting high horse. So even before last week's press conference, Evans himself had modified his account of the cause of death in 3 of the 7 infants. This is in response to public exposure, as, for example, in the Channel 5 documentary. So he modified his account of the cause of death in babies C, I, and P, as they're known, that Letby was convicted of murdering. But he still maintains that she's guilty, and so does the Thirlwall inquiry, for that matter. The inquiry has been in session on and off since last September, willfully ignoring every single argument that has come to light that Lucy Letby was scapegoated, the inquiry is just doubling down on her conviction and giving it an air of respectability. So, in addition to Dr. Xu Li, whom I've mentioned, there are many, many medical experts working with Lucy Letby's defense team on a pro bono basis, and looking at the actual causes of deaths of the babies involved, one of whom most likely died because of a blunder by one of the consultants who intended to aspirate a baby's abdomen but perforated the liver. So now I want to come to the question of how to defend Lucy Letby. Her barrister, Mark MacDonald, has referred her case to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and he is determined to pursue every possible legal angle. That is surely a welcome development. But we cannot rely on the courts, and even if they're successful, the legal review process takes forever. Furthermore, history has shown that the British establishment will fight to the bitter end to uphold the honour of its justice system rather than admit that it locks up innocent people. The freeing of the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four, innocent Irish people who were framed up by the police for bombings in Britain, it took years of tough legal battles as well as public campaigns to free those people. And as we saw in the post office scandal, it took years of struggle to expose the frame-up. And even then, when the evidence came out, the authorities did their damnedest to hide the truth. And so for those of us who support Lucy Letby, it's worth noting why the post office got away with it for so long. They did so by silencing their critics, using fear of being sacked and even prosecuted, and they sent people to prison to make examples of them. So, in a similar fashion, nurses in the National Health Service have been threatened with disciplinary action for speaking up in favour of Lucy Letby. One of her co-workers was warned not to provide a character statement in her defence at the trial. The health service unions must be activated to stop this bullying and intimidation. Nurses and doctors who worked with her know that Lucy Letby is a caring, conscientious nurse. When she was first targeted by hospital consultants, the Royal College of Nursing, RCN, of which she was a member, represented Lucy in a grievance procedure against those very consultants who painted a target on her back, and she won her case. The arrogant consultants were told to apologize to her, and quite right too, but the consultants went to the police, and as I said earlier, they helped to frame up this nurse. Throughout this entire show trial, where's the RCN? They have kept a shameful silence. Since the grievance procedure, they have done absolutely nothing and said nothing in her defense. So they have been silent even as these medical experts are working to unravel what actually happened with those babies. Why is the RCN silent, you may ask? The fact is, the leadership is an obstacle to the unions standing up to the NHS and to the political elites. Lucy was framed up while Pat Cullen was RCN General Secretary. It is despicable that Cullen, who is now a Sinn Féin Member of Parliament, endorsed the conviction of Lucy Letby at the time But it's no surprise that Cullen would side with the establishment against someone who's being scapegoated by the NHS on her watch, Pat Cullen's watch, during the 2022 to 23 strike wave in the National Health Service. The RCN bowed the knee to the monarchy when the Queen died. And of course, the union conducted the strike in a way that was lame and weak-kneed against the NHS bosses, and this show of weakness led to a defeat for the RCN in the strikes, so the NHS bosses came out of it with a green light to bulldoze ahead with the privatisation of the health service. And in this atmosphere, bullying and intimidation of nurses is rampant. If you think about it, if the RCN had fought a hard battle and won the strikes, its members would not be so petrified to stand up and speak out when they know that Lucy Letby has been scapegoated for the failings of the system itself. So my point is that the NHS unions are the force that can put an end to the rampant scapegoating in the NHS that sent Lucy Letby to prison for the rest of her life. Now, the rest of us must do everything that we can to protest this frame-up, but the unions are key. So to build a campaign for demanding justice for her means forcing the RCN leadership to break its silence. That may well mean defying the union leadership. The unions must be kick-started to galvanize the support for her that already exists. Nurses who worked with her knew her as a caring and hardworking nurse. They know that she worked extra shifts very often to cover for staff shortages, and yet they are petrified to speak out for fear of intimidation. So our response to that is the union must do its job. Anyone who speaks out against scapegoating, anyone who speaks up for Lucy Letby, who works in the National Health Service, must know that the union will have their back. The whole point of being a union member is that you cannot be bullied by management because you're not alone. That's what the unions are there for. So union reps in the RCN must fight intimidation, call a union meeting, let the union be seen by its members as someone who stands up to the NHS management. And if your union rep is not prepared to do that, elect another one, someone who will stand up to the NHS. So that's how we will get the unions to become effective again in defense of their own members, and they will be able to fight not only against scapegoating of NHS nurses and doctors, but they will also have taken a real step to standing up and saving the National Health Service from privatization and ruin, because those two tasks are linked together: defense of its own members working in the NHS and defending the NHS itself. So, in conclusion, let us all take a stand, all of us who support Lucy Letby. Let's demonstrate Lucy Letby should not spend another day in prison for crimes that simply didn't even happen. So, save the date. It is the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day. Book the day off if you can. Meet us outside the Thirlwall Inquiry, Liverpool Town Hall at 9 a.m. Those of us who don't live in Liverpool, it probably means getting to the city the day before. If you have the means, do that and bring everyone else that you can. We will bring signs and a banner saying Free Lucy Letby. Feel free to bring your own signs, bring yourselves, bring others. Enough is enough. As someone put in the comments in following my previous video, Andrew Emery, said, we must take, and I quote, take the social media outrage and put it on the streets. I couldn't have put it better myself. He really hit the nail on the head. That's what we want to do. And I hope to see you all there. Once again, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your support for a protest. So let's do it.